Okay, so today I want to talk about video game balance, which is always a very fun topic for people. No one has ever gotten heated about video game balance discussion in history, no sir. So, then surprisingly enough, I don't want to talk about Mercy because people are a little bit upset with Mercy right now. I don't really want to talk about Mercy. I'm more interested in talking about, because this is something I've been thinking about lately, and that's the heroes on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because Mercy is like a pretty mandatory pick right now, basically. She, I would wager she has a very high win rate as a result, because she's in every game. But, so, what I want to talk about is like the heroes on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because I think we could all agree that no one really wants a hero in the game to be mandatory, right? But, are we okay with some heroes just always having a very low win ratio, right? Because think about heroes like Sombra and Hanzo. They have always had very low win ratios. Because they're very hard to play heroes, right? I think there's a bigger issue with Hanzo, but let's talk about Sombra first. So, like, Sombra has the highest skill floor in the game, right? She is very hard to play. I would say she is the hardest hero to play in the game, because she's difficult in two different ways, right? Because most heroes are difficult one way or the other. Like, and the ways that you can be a hero to be difficult are mechanically, right? You know, Widowmaker is very hard mechanically, because you have to hit people in the head, and if you don't, you're just not very good at Widowmaker, right? She's very high mechanical skill cap. And then other heroes have a higher, like, game sense, or, like, meta-knowledge cap, right? Like, Mercy is not hard to play mechanically, but you have to weigh various decisions in your mind very quickly in the heat of the moment, right? So she's not difficult gameplay-wise, she's not difficult mechanically, she's difficult in, like, game sense terms. Sombra's difficult in both ways, right? Because she has to be able to, like, she has a base level of aim requirement, and then also mechanically, like, moving around the map and, like, all these things. But then she also has the game sense aspect, because her ultimate is based entirely around that. She's based a lot around positioning and repositioning throughout the map to keep yourself, like, unpredictable and that kind of thing. So Sombra's difficult in both ways, which most heroes are not. So, but she's always had a very low win ratio because she's hard to play. Are we okay with having heroes that are just always going to have a low win ratio because they're just hard to play? Or do we think that we should bring Sombra up so that, to lower the skill gap so that, like, a bad Sombra isn't, like, utter dead weight, right? Or are we okay with Sombra just being really hard to play and as a result always having a low win ratio? Because I don't think it's a bad thing inherently that Sombra has a low win ratio, because I don't think it's an imbalance in the hero. I don't think Sombra herself is a bad hero. I think that people just don't know how to play Sombra correctly in most cases. And then the stats also probably get slightly bogged down, because Sombra is one of those heroes that if somebody has decided that they're just going to throw a game, she's one of the heroes that they might change to throw the game, right? Where they just start translocating off the edge over and over again. So that probably pads the statistics down a little bit as well. But she's always going to have a low ratio because she's hard to play. And I think that's a bad thing. But, I don't know how many people would agree with that one. Hanzo, I think, has a different issue, because Hanzo has also always had a low win ratio. And yes, Hanzo is obviously difficult to play because he's a sniper, right? There's a base level of aim requirement, but his is steeper than Widowmaker's as well, because Widowmaker is at least a hit scan hero, right? As long as you point the cursor over the person's head, they die. Hanzo's a projectile hero, so that adds in, there's the aim element, but then there's also the projectile element, which makes it harder to aim, just inherently, but then there's also a degree of chance to it as well, right? Because as soon as you let go of the arrow, well, the person might just suddenly move a different way and dodge it through, like, no fault of their own, right? Hanzo, I think, has a base, like, consistency issue, where because he has a very high skill cap, obviously he's a sniper, but then there's also inconsistency just inherently because he is a projectile sniper. So as soon as you hit it, well, as soon as you let go of the arrow, who knows how that person's gonna move, right? Like, they have to keep moving the way you thought they were gonna move, or you don't hit them. They might just happen to dodge. So, there's a lot of things can go wrong with Hanzo, which I think is part of the problem as well. So I think that I have no issue with Sombra having a low win ratio just inherently, because I don't think it's because of the hero itself. Hanzo, I think, actually does have some kind of issue inherently with him, because there's just an inherent inconsistency in a projectile sniper. And that Widowmaker doesn't have this, because she is hit scan. You just aim correctly, they are dead. That's it. There's no ifs or buts about it. They got hit. Hanzo has an element of chance attached to it. So, I wonder if there's something needs to be done with Hanzo. And, like, I don't even necessarily have an issue with, like, Scatter Arrow, which people commonly point to as, like, a thing that they don't like. Like, yeah, sometimes you get killed by Scatter Arrow, and it doesn't feel good, but it's not really any different than if you just happen to get hit by random Junkrat shrapnel, right? Like, I've played games where there's been a Pharah and a Junkrat on the enemy team, and they've both just happened to hit me at the same time, and I've died, right? It's no different than Scatter Arrow, really. Like, it's just, yeah, I died to it, and, like, out of nowhere. But there's lots of things in this game that you can die from out of nowhere. You can, like, just not see Reinhardt coming, and then you get pinned and die, right? You can play Mercy and GA across, right, as somebody uses their ultimate, and, oh, fuck, you got hit just out of nowhere, right? So I don't really have an issue with Scatter Arrow, like most people do. I do make fun of it, like, oh, what a skillful ability whenever somebody kills somebody with it, but, like, I don't really have an issue with it, So, but I don't really know what you could do with Hanzo. Look, I've seen this idea that, he could, like, the cool thing about Hanzo is that he has pretty unique utility attached to him, right? Because he has, he's one of the only heroes in the game with access to, wall hacks, infrasight, which is a really strong utility, actually, and it's probably the strongest thing about Hanzo is Sonic Arrow, right? So, I've seen this idea that, you could try and attach more utility to Hanzo to try and, like, give him more consistency, because utility is pretty consistent, right? Even if you're a projectile sniper, if you've got a bunch of utility attached to your kit, that adds a degree of, consistency to you. But I do think it's possible to take that too far, where, like, he still has this ability to, like, one-shot people, because Hanzo does a fucking lot of damage, right? As long as you hit, he does a fucking lot of damage. So I worry that attaching too much utility might tip him too far the other way, where it's like, well, now you kind of have to pick Hanzo, because, like, he has this high DPS, but high utility. But I think I think something needs to be done to Hanzo to add, like, some kind of consistency to him. And, like, I did quite like this idea, which is basically, like, give him more abilities, where, like, maybe even give him, like, a radial menu to select different types of arrows, basically, that do different types of things, because... Right, like, we got Sonic Arrow, we got Scatter Arrow, but you could have, like, an explosive arrow, or maybe, like, flashbang arrow, right? This, the freezing arrow, or something like that. And just, like, give him a bunch of different abilities, or there was, like, one that was, like, a piercing arrow that's, like, it's like a cooldown, but it can go through shields. That one, I think, I heard that one, I was, like, not quite okay with that one, because then suddenly, Reinhardt's just standing around, he gets shot in the face, because he's holding his shield up. But, I thought, like, the baseline idea of giving him more arrows, and therefore, like, more utility, and would give him some more consistency. Because I do think Hanzo has an issue, specifically with terms of balance, because he's just inconsistent. There are other low win ratio heroes. They're like, if you look at, like, their stats on Master Overwatch or, like, Overbuff, you see that, like, Symmetra and Torbjorn have high win ratios. Those are not reflective of the community at large, because you have to have actually, like, checked your stats to show up in the rankings, basically. So, like, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio for the general population. And generally, people who are on the higher end of the spectrum are more likely to check their stats. So, like, it gets skewed a little bit in favor of the higher players, which is why I think gives the illusion that Symmetra and Torbjorn have higher win ratios than they actually do. I don't think those stats are reflective as the community at large. Because they also have like really low play ratios on those websites, but I don't think that they actually have like a 5% play ratio or whatever. You know, I think they probably get played more than that. It's just a little bit skewed because of how the websites work. I think they overall probably have a fairly low win ratio with the community at large, right? And I don't know how you fix that for certain heroes. Like, I don't know what you do for a hero like Torbjorn or Bastion to make them better, right? Because this is an issue that, like, certain... You know, I'm going to draw a comparison to League of Legends here, where there is an issue with, like, balancing certain heroes in League of Legends, where there are some heroes that have always been either too strong or completely useless, because they revolve basically entirely around auto-attacking. These are the ones that always have the issue. Like Xin Zhao, Jax have typically been hard to balance, because they basically just auto-attack. Which means they're really easy to play. So, basically, there's just an element of if you turn the lever too far one way, they're completely overpowered. But if you turn it too far the other way, they're completely useless. Because it's just like raw numbers. There's like, they have a low skill floor, but they have a low skill ceiling as a result. And I think Bastion and Torbjorn are an example of this as well, where like, if you just turn Torbjorn's leather too far one way or too far the other, he's too strong. Because if the turret's too strong, well, the game plays itself, right? But if the turret's too far the other way, well, it's completely useless, and what's the point, right? Bastion, at the same time, like, not hard to play Bastion, right? It's mostly whether or not the enemy team doesn't play around you. Like, he's easy to play. You just hover in their area with the cursor and you probably kill him, right? It's like, if you just turn him too far one way or too far the other, he's completely overpowered or he's completely useless. And we saw this very briefly of him getting turned too far the other way right after the Omnic Crisis, where his damage reduction was insane and you could not kill Bastion. And there was like a few days period where Bastion was like really fucking strong. And like, I think that there are certain heroes that are just gonna always have this problem where, because they're so easy to play, it's just a numbers game, right? Like, Winston as well could have this issue where he's very easy to play baseline. He's mostly on the meta side. He doesn't have much mechanical play. So if you just turn it too far one way or too far the other, he just completely skews one way or the other. Like right now, I think Winston might be a little bit too strong because he's just incredibly consistent, but he's very easy to play and he's very consistent. So I think Winston might be a little bit of an issue as well, but like not to any like significant degree that's really worth talking about. Like, we've got bigger issues than Winston right now, you know? But I don't really know what you do. So I mean, really, I'm just like curious as to like what people think about heroes like Sombra just like having a low win ratio because they're hard to play. I don't have an issue with that, but I'm kind of curious as to like other people's input, basically. I don't know what you do for heroes like Bastion or Torbjorn, though, because they're just so easy to play that it just shakes out to me as basically being a numbers game. Take it too far one way, too far the other. Well, game snapped in two suddenly, right? It's difficult. Video game balance is really difficult, as it turns out. So that's all I really want to say. Because, I mean, everyone's really focused on the upper end right now. Oh, Junkrat's too strong. Oh, Mercy's too strong. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay, whatever. I'm more interested in the lower end, because, like, we've never really talked about, like, Bastion or Sombra at large, right? Like, no one's ever really brought it up. And, like, I think also Hanzo is one of those heroes where, like, Sombra and Hanzo are, like, two of those heroes where people don't really want them to be particularly strong, because, you know, they would be quite unfun to play against, but I mean, I don't necessarily find, like, Junkrat fun to play against, right? Like, anyway, so, that's really no one ever really has talked about the lower end, so I was just like, you know, I'm gonna talk about the lower end, whatever, you know, I feel like it. I feel like being incoherent and rambling today. So thank you very much for watching. If you did, you know, please, you know, let me know what you think about the balance issue. You know, like, I'm not so interested in like the upper end, because I think people are generally at a consensus with what we think about Mercy. I'm more curious as to what people think about like the lower end, really. But anyway, so thank you very much for watching. If you did, please let me know. Answers on a postcard, please. Thank you for watching.